right. Hey guys, what's up? Dave Duford here, and yet again at another No BS Final Expense Sales Training live stream on YouTube. Want to thank you so much again for joining me today, and I do hope, as I always do, to provide you with informative and, most importantly, actionable training you can actually implement in your final expense game. So that is the purpose of why I do these things, to actually help you become a better final expense agent. So today's topic today is on final expense, rapport, and introduction training. So this is an interesting topic, one of which I've talked about several times. I think it's very important, something very important you should learn how to do. And what I'm going to do that's a little different with this particular topic is actually reference this neat book that I've been reading over the weekend. I'll show you again. It's called The Art of Witty Banter by a guy named Patrick King. I went on a book buying binge a couple of, about a weekend ago or something like that. I bought 11, 12 books and I've consumed about half of them so far. And one of which has actually turned out to be a lot better than I thought. And I think a lot of what's in this particular book references really effective ways on how to build rapport and to properly introduce yourself. And really the most important thing to create a connection to your client. And the one thing I will mention here, so why learn about final expense rapport building, and why is this topic important really to begin with? Well, so the main reason that I'm doing this training is because I think it's very important to establish yourself as someone who is likable, somebody that you can trust, that somebody can trust you, and then also establish yourself and position yourself in this position that the client understands who you are, what you're doing, and why they should listen to you. That is basically setting the table before you really get into the thick of the final expense sales presentation process. And that all occurs within this particular section of the sales training. And the guys that don't do or really develop this very well, they don't really create the underbedding, the underpinning foundational aspects to being able to sell successfully in the final expense field. If you can't connect with your customer, and more importantly, if you can't have them understand why you're there and why they should care, then you're not going to do very well. So the way I'm going to do this particular sales presentation process, by the way, I do have the ability to read your comments. If you've got questions about anything at all about this particular training or any kind of final expense training at all, feel free to leave a question or a comment. I'll be happy to address each one individually. And if you're watching this at a later date, recorded, feel free to ask a question. I always like to get comments. I always answer every single comment that's left individually. So I definitely encourage you to leave it. So let's go ahead and start off with the basics of rapport building. And then what I'm going to do, I'm looking at my book over here, I'm going to interweave in some of the elements I've learned over the weekend reading this book into this particular conversation, because the thing with rapport building, as I've taught it, is that rapport building, out of all the different scenarios of the sales presentation process to sell final expense, is the kind that's not as specific. I can give you a script for introducing yourself, as you'll find out, properly pre-qualifying, properly presenting, and closing. I can show you something to follow word by word, but the thing about rapport building, it's a funny thing. It depends on who you're talking to. It's much more looser and conversational and random in nature, but there's a definite goal that you want to accomplish, and that's being liked, trusted, and hopefully establishing a reason why, in their mind, why they should listen to you to begin with. So the rapport building's always been something that's just been kind of nebulous. It's nothing that's really, I've taught as being super specific. So what I'm going to try to do is take some things I've learned that I've kind of taken these thoughts on how I teach it and be more specific in the application of it. Hopefully you'll walk away with a better understanding of how to implement the concept of rapport building. So if you're new and you're asking, well, what's rapport to begin with? Well, rapport building is the idea of befriending your prospect. Maybe not as a friend, but being friendly, being conversational, establishing some level of connection with your prospect so that they like you to some extent, and at least start the building of trust. You don't necessarily establish trust initially. Trust is built through the entirety of the sales presentation, but this is where it starts. And so it's really important to be able to determine and develop it right away from the beginning. So with rapport building, your goal and the way that you do rapport building effectively is you basically learn more about the prospect and what makes them tick, and what they do, what they like, things they don't like, just kind of like what you would do if you're meeting somebody new. Well, again, we'll get specific with some recommendations I'm going to take out of this book directly. But more importantly, how do you know that you have enough rapport built to begin with? I want to address this up front. This is always kind of the question, right? Do you talk for 20, 30 minutes and have this long conversation and then sell them? Or do you talk for less than that? I used to do it 20 to 30 minutes long. I felt like if the longer I let them talk and we're more conversational, the more they'll like me. And even though it's taken forever, I know that I've established a relationship with them, and I've got the best opportunity because they like me to some extent that they'll buy if there's any need there. So what I found out is, though, you could actually establish rapport a lot faster within 5 to 10 minutes if you know what to do and what to look for. The key thing in rapport building is to break the ice. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to get them to laugh. If you can get them to laugh, if you can picture somebody crossed arms, that this is like they're protecting, it's like a physical shield. They're listening to you, they're leaning back, they're cautious. But if you make them laugh at some joke and they laugh and you'll see them physically disarm, literally disarm. And that's when you've at least cracked the door open to them being open-minded. Because again, one of the reasons we establish rapport is to remove the initial, evolutionary resistance to a change of thinking or a threatening situation where we might be there to try to take their money or try to push them around and harass them. So we want to bring that barrier down. And making them laugh a little bit, even if it's something silly, is like the way to know that you're pretty much at the point where you can progress to the introduction. So how do you get to the laughing point, or how do you get to the point where you've put them at ease? Well, again, body language speaks more than words. You'll notice they'll be leaning in more. They'll make eye contact with you. They'll laugh. Their hands will be out. They'll be talking with their hands. They won't be like this. Physically, they'll be open to you, and they'll look interested. That's usually, and you got to look and train yourself to look for these body cues, because body language speaks tremendously higher and more accurately than any sort of language patterns that you might use. So, with language patterns mentioned, so let's talk about some aspects in this book that I think are very applicable to the rapport building process. Again, this book is called The Art of Witty Banter. I'm not being paid for this endorsement. I just read this book this weekend, or at least I'm about halfway through it, and a lot of useful information is really described within the book. So the book is about how to be a better conversationalist. If you can picture a networking event where you're meeting a bunch of strangers, what do you even tell these people or talk to these? What do you even say to kind of create a connection with these people? And so the whole book basically takes that premise and sets up a systematic approach into what to say, how to say things, keeping stories specifically stored in your mind, kind of what he calls a personal resume of conversation, where you can ring up different stories, different relevant events that kind of create intrigue and interest, but also teaches the person, which I think is most applicable for what we do, on how to be a good conversationalist and how to reciprocate and how to allow the person they're speaking with to engage better with them, because that's the crucial element to being a good conversationalist, is really to, in a sense, shut up and let them talk and be intrigued in what they have to say. And as a salesperson, that's exactly the goal that we have when we do rapport of any kind. So I want to just bring up a couple of pages I brought in here, and I thought were really good as far as conversational technique goes. So one of this chapter is called Never Speak in Absolutes. So what happens is, again, that is an absolute, right? Don't do this. Never speak in absolutes. But the concept is essentially, when we're rapport building with a prospect, you don't want to ask a close-ended question, okay? Or some sort of question that puts them on the spot that they may not have an answer for. In a sense, that means we don't want to ask a close-ended, simple question that does not allow for an expansion of the idea or the emotion that's behind it. A simple way to look at this is, who is your favorite music band? Well, they may have to think about that. They may not have that off the top of their head. An easier question to ask would be like, what are your top 3 favorite country music bands that you love listening to? They'll be able to generate ideas and things to speak about. much easier than if you asked an absolute. And on a bigger perspective, this exemplifies how I teach rapport in my final expense training, that you want to ask open-ended questions, okay? When you're getting to know somebody and you're asking questions, you don't want to ask yes, no, absolute type questions. You want to ask open-ended questions, you know, that pry into what is on the person's mind, but also reveals some emotion, reveals some intrigue, and really gets them interested in you because you're asking a really cool question that brings out more of a personal side to the conversation itself. So very effective. Don't use absolutes over the top, especially in the beginning. Open-ended is the way to go. Think before you react. Very good section in this book, in the sense that how you respond is very important. The key word is how. And the way that you do this, and guys have probably heard of mirroring the person, body language wise. If they're leaning in, you lean in. Eventually they'll follow you. Basic stuff on how to really connect with a person. Not verbally, but body language wise. You want to mirror each other. Even crossing the legs the same way. I mean, it's crazy, and a lot of it's actually very true and really works. And so with this, it's kind of along the same line. When you can respond in a sense that matches the tonality and the motion behind it, you're gonna connect with them. They may not see it, but when you like recognize their emotion by how they say something, then you know that's a good thing. That you're connecting with them. So the key takeaway here for you as a final expense agent is you got to respond in emotionally similar ways. You can't be deadpan or flippant when they're emotionally talking about the loss of their husband and the pain it caused on their family and the money they didn't have to bury him and then had to cremate him or something like that. You want to respond in a similar emotional capacity because, again, you respond in the correct way, in the reciprocal way, in the mirrored way. That's a connection that's even deeper because in a way, you know how they feel and they sense that. They may not be able to verbalize it like right now, but they can feel it, and that's what you want to go for. So again, think before you react. Very important to do in the sales process. Got a couple more tips here for you. Us against the world technique. You know, we're on the same side kind of thing. This is really good, really more so in the presentation side. This is a old-fashioned, old as the hills type of persuasion tactic where you want to be on their side. And you really want to be on their side anyway, even though we're there to help, we're there to sell them something, we're ultimately there to help them or not. Again, and when we say something like that in the introductory phase or more likely in the presentation phase, like, hey, I'm here to help you out if I can. If I can't, that's fine. But I'm on your side to get you the best result, not like these other guys. And again, that's going to create a connection. Again, you'll see that more often in the presentation phase where you're going to castigate the colonial pins, the AARPs, the term, the 2-year waiting periods that are ripping off seniors and are charging high prices like the captive companies out there. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. Aren't those guys the bad guys? You know, that's why I do what I do, to help you, to fight against them. See what I'm saying? So having that connection again, if you can formulate that in your presentation process and separate out the bad guys from you, the good guys, they're going to be more connected with you. And then as you prove this through the presentation process, it's a very good thing. And you can begin to put the seeds down in the beginning in the rapport building phase. But ultimately, it's really more of a phase 3 type of situation where you're presenting. This is something cool that I wanted to bring up, and it's called setting boundaries on the conversation. I'm going to use this in my rapport building, even though I'm pretty good at just getting to the point. You know, I don't spend more than 5 or 10 minutes. But the idea is that in order to get somebody to honestly talk with you, you give them a limit of time that you're going to speak with them. So essentially what you say is, before we get started to this next phase, where I tell you what I'm doing here to begin with, let me ask you one more question. And then you ask them a question, something, whatever that is. But what you've done is you've established the norm. In the sense, you're going to conversate about whatever it is that you wanted to, but they know and you know, once that's done with, it's on to why am I here to begin with. I see this as a potential where I plan to use this in the rapport building side, is I want to use this if I get somebody who's talkative a lot and I can kind of sense they are going to want to talk a lot, I may respond and say, hey, I want to tell you one more thing before we move on to the next part of why I'm even here. Well, actually, let me ask you a question. So then, I'm going to ask you a question before we move to this next phase that I need to get to before I go. So you've already established we're done talking about it without being a jerk. And I've always wondered how to do that, how to end a conversation without being rude, because I'm very forthcoming and giving, and I'm a good conversationalist since I listen to a lot of people, and I'm happy to because I'm genuinely interested in most people. But this allows me to set an end to it that I have some sort of control over. I thought that was really helpful for me, at least. Make the other person an expert kind of ties in really in the rapport building stage where they have something that is of interest in you. Be genuinely interested, ask questions. So really, how did that really happen that way? That's awesome that you know so much about that. What else do you know about that? If you kind of laud and praise them for whatever their special uniqueness is, and all these people have something like that, again, you're showing interest in them. They like that. Plus, it exhibits this kind of desire and need we all have to be respected and have an authority on a subject matter. And so if you formulate the questions that you ask and make sure that you laud them and praise, their knowledge on a certain subject, then they'll feel special. And that's what we want. And they like us for that. It makes us better conversationalists and better at developing rapport. So those are the tips that I plan on doing and using going forward with rapport building. The big thing for me is setting boundaries on the talk time. To me, it's more of a plan B if I don't maintain control right away. If I get somebody, and this is probably about 20% of the prospects I see, they want to talk and tell me their life story. I may ask a question of them, but just say, before we move on to this stuff I'm here to talk about, let me ask you one more question. So that way I know there's an end to it in sight. Because sometimes, especially you guys that are out there selling this stuff for a living, know that people can go on and on and on without any regard to your time, what you're trying to accomplish, and really without regard to you trying to help them. So anyways, bottom line, rapport building, create a connection, be genuinely interested in them, and make your goal to get them at ease. Convert them from being closed-minded physically and mentally to open-minded, relaxed, smiling, and just in a general state of being open-minded. That's the key thing. You don't need to be their best friend. You don't need to be anything other than just a receptive state for the ideas you're about to share. So that brings me to the second portion of this training, which is the introductory training. So whereas the rapport building is less scripted, less specific on what exactly to say every time, the introduction statement is absolutely scripted and should more or less be said with the same level of conviction and scripting each and every time you're in a sales call. The important thing you've got to do is to quickly differentiate yourself once somebody is open-minded to what you have to say, and be able to describe to them who you are, what you're doing, and why that matters to them. So this statement is what we call a unique selling proposition. It's a differentiating proposition. It lets the person know, who may or may not be interested or even qualified, why we're there, why they should listen to us, and really what's in it for them for doing it. So it's a very powerful statement to memorize and learn with conviction and passion. So let me give you more or less what I say when I introduce myself to somebody, and then we'll go over kind of some of the intricacies of it. Not very complicated, but let me get to the point. So, well, now that you've told me, and this is the transitionary phrase I use from the rapport to the introduction. Well, now you've told me a little bit about yourself, Mrs. Jones. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, who I am, and what I do. So first of all, my name is David Duford. I'm a licensed life insurance agent in the state of Tennessee. I've been licensed for about 6 years. I have over 1,500 clients I have life insurance with that are in your age group. And the reason that people do business with me is that I'm what's called an independent broker. I shop around to try to find the best price and best value of coverage for my clients, because many people we see have health problems or on a fixed income. Bottom line, what I do that a lot of other agents don't do is get you the best coverage for whatever it is you can afford, so that you're getting the best value for what you're looking to accomplish. Does that make sense? Perfect. So that's actually the transition into the pre-qualification stage. So let's take a look at what exactly I said. So we got the transitionary phrase. Important to remember the transitionary phrase to make the move from rapport to introduction less clunky. And usually that's, cool, Miss Jones, well, let me tell you, now that I know a little bit about you, let me tell you about myself. That's pretty much all you need to say. That just creates that transition so that they know where they're going. This is where you introduce yourself. So when I introduce myself, I tell them my name, I tell them I'm licensed, and how long I've been and how many customers I have. This is all credibility statements. And so one way to do this, if you don't have time, experience in this business and you're brand new, you may be thinking, well, who would want to listen to me anyway? Well, it's enough that you've got a license, you've got the state approval to be an insurance man. That's enough in the eyes of all these people to be convinced that you know what you're talking about. There's not going to be any people who scoff at you because you haven't been in the business but a month. You know, when they see the license and they see that it's real, then they're going to take you at your word. So that brings up to another point. When you're saying this stuff, in many cases, and this is not just in this section, but throughout the presentation process, you want to show and tell and show. So when you say, I'm licensed with the state of Tennessee, hand them over a laminated version of your license. Let them look at it for themselves. You don't need to necessarily have them take it their word. Tell them I've been licensed with the state of Tennessee at the beginning of this year. I've jumped through all the hoops. I've taken all the tests, and I'm certified as a licensed agent able to help people like yourself. That's enough credibility statement with a license in front of them. And you can do that whether you're new or experienced. But showing is a visual representation of what it is that we do. And again, it's a credibility booster. It cannot hurt by showing them your license. Just make sure it's up to date and not expired. I did that once and people kind of looked at it a little weird. But anyways, so after that, again, if you've got time in this business, even if you don't have a lot of clients, hey, I've been licensed since whenever, that's fine. It exudes a sense of you've been around the block for a while. You may not have a lot of business, but they won't think that. They'll just know that you've been licensed, which implies experience, which is what we're going for. This point, the next point, the reason why people do business with me is right to the point. Again, what I want them to understand is this is why people even talk to me. Because I want to relate in this statement I'm about to say with who they are and what their financial situations are, along with what they want to accomplish. Basically, I want to say in so many words, in a third-party validation way, that what I do with everybody else is exactly what you need. But I want them to think of that themselves. I want to tell them why you need to do business with me. I kind of go about it the back way. I let them say, yeah, I'm that too. Yeah, I want to do business. I want this to be their own idea. I don't want to force this down their throat and force them to think that they should do business with me. So a little word changes make a difference, at least mentally for me, because I'm allowing them to arrive at their own conclusions, which is much more powerful and believable and solid of an opinion than forcing them to think a certain way. Hopefully that makes sense. That's a big philosophical sales difference that I have with versus a lot of other people. So again, the script goes like this. The reason people do business with me is because I'm what's called an independent broker. I don't represent just one company. I represent a variety of companies. What I'm able to do that a lot of other agents aren't able to do is shop around all these 10 to 15 companies I have to find the best price and the best value of coverage. Bottom line, Mrs. Jones, if you're looking for the best bang for your buck and the best value, that's what I can do for you. So that's how the phrase goes. Now you notice I left out the thing about being on a fixed income or health issues. You can throw that in there. Sometimes I remember to do it, sometimes I don't. But the point I'm trying to convey is I can shop around to get you the best price and the best value of coverage. And usually I'm pretty good at doing that, and it's pretty much a truthful statement. It is always a truthful statement. But the point is that I convey that I can deliver the best value and the best price. And if you're looking for that, then you can find that through me. That's the idea. And notice I didn't say why you need to do business. It's why others do. And when you say why others do, it implies, again, that you're an expert. You've talked to hundreds. If you've been around for a couple of years, you seemingly must have talked to a lot of people about this stuff. So it implies expertise, it applies authority, and it applies peer pressure groups. And that's a good thing. Hey, everybody does this. Everybody buys from me because of these reasons. And the thing is, well, if everybody does, then maybe I should too. That's kind of the idea when it comes to the report building type of or part of the training process. So when it comes to the introduction to rapport, the conclusions here are very simple. So number one, rapport building should not be a 5 to 10. Well, it should not be a 30-minute marathon session where you're talking, you're talking. They're talking your ear off. It should not be that at all. You should be able to get to the point fairly quickly and practice being able to establish a level of connection. That's the goal, not friendship, connection, within 5 to 10 minutes of beginning the sales call. If you live in the South, if you're like me and more prone to be low-key when it comes to being conversational and being happy to let people talk, you got to work on that. That's something I've had to work on. But 5 to 10 minutes is enough to accomplish the goal of making a connection. You should be able, it's all you should be able to do. The goal of rapport building is to ask open-ended questions about who they are, what their background is, what they like, what they don't like, enough to get them to relax physically, mentally, and be really open-minded, just like their body language will tell you, to be openly receptive to your ideas and concepts you're about to sell them on. A closed mind does not lead to a sale. So you got to open them up with a sufficient level of rapport that at least gets them to marginally like you and marginally trust you. At least, again, build the seeds, because all of that stuff is compounded as the sales process goes on. Once you've established that in 5 to 10 minutes, then you should introduce yourself. That builds trust. The more concise you are, the more emphatic you are in the main points and know how to drive it home, the more trust and connection you're going to build just from the introduction standpoint. If you know what you are, who you are, and why they should listen to you, and you can say it succinctly, it's very powerful from the beginning, because it sets the table, as does the whole thing, as to the whole sales presentation and what the goals are of what you're going to accomplish. So that's pretty much it with the final expense sales training today. A little shorter than usual, only 26 minutes long. I usually do these things closer to an hour. So the rapport and introduction, pretty straightforward. The next sales presentation we'll do eventually, maybe in a week or two, will be part 2. That's a much more detailed, very more technical approach to figuring out if your prospect is qualified or not. So I invite you to join me next week on next Monday at 12 p.m. for another No BS Final Expense Sales Training session. Again, I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions about the mentorship program, anything that we do in particular that might be of interest to you, go ahead and leave a comment, or feel free to go to my website and click on the contact form and press submit with your question. I individually respond to most of the questions, or my support team does. Again, we'd be happy to answer any questions you have about anything that we do. And last statement, Daniel, how you doing, sir? The book, the paperback book, is now available on Amazon. Finally got that up, so if you wanted to buy, I know you mentioned that last week, Daniel, feel free to go there and make a purchase. Otherwise, I do have an ebook available that goes into intricate detail about the sales training process. That is available on my website under the Buy Stuff icon at the top or navigation thing. So anyways, that's it. Thank you so much for joining, guys, and we will see you next week. Y'all take care.